All right, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and get us started with our songwriting in session workshop. Hannah, if you can unshare your screen so I can share mine, that would be fabulous. Awesome. All right. And I do have a cat, so he might make an appearance. We shall see. All right. So, songwriting in session, a workshop by me. Let's go. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about songwriting generally as an intervention in music therapy. We're going to do a very short review on some of the literature related to songwriting and music therapy. We're going to talk about considerations and things you want to ask yourself when you're creating a songwriting TME, a songwriting intervention. We're going to talk about some songwriting strategies, and then we're going to talk very briefly about using technology for songwriting, which will segue well into Hannah's presentation. And then we're going to close up. Cool. So why songwrite in session? Songwriting can be used in session for so many different goals with a really wide variety of presenting problems and diagnostic groups. It can be customized to fit clients' needs. It can be a really empowering experience for clients, and it can result in a tangible physical takeaway for clients that they can revisit outside sessions. So they can revisit those concepts that you went over in session and carry them with them. And it's one of our major tools, along with the 4 big methods: improv, comp, receptive, and recreative. So, we should use it when we can, when it makes sense. So songwriting doesn't have to be scary. Something I notice when I talk to other music therapy students is a lot of them will see songwriting as this like big scary thing that they don't really want to try to do in session. But the reality is there are so many different ways to do songwriting. And oftentimes it helps for us to remember that songwriting can be a scary process for our clients as well. And it might actually be beneficial to sit in that discomfort and work through it with them. And that might help with their own therapeutic process. And then you learn something new too. Wow. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the literature. So songwriting can work for a variety of presenting problems or diagnoses. One study I looked at was on older adults with dementia. There were 30 individuals in the study. They did a closed procedure songwriting process with preferred music, and they did this 60 minutes a week for 16 weeks. And in the experimental group, compared to the control group, which I believe was treatment as is, they found that the experimental group, so the songwriting group, language function, orientation, and memory increased significantly following the songwriting treatment. Attention and calculation and comprehension and judgment also increased, but not significantly. Depression, there's a lot of literature out there for songwriting and composition with clients who have depression. This particular study was done on 105 inpatient psychiatric clients and randomized into 3 different groups, which was interesting because one of these groups, you could actually compare music therapy songwriting against recreational music therapy. And then the third group was just a psychoeducation group. And this study found that the songwriting group had the highest mean quality of life scores and the lowest mean depression scores. I don't believe there was significance in this study, but a little bit about research. Typically research in our field is a very small N, so even if you don't find significance, findings can still be meaningful. All right, on trauma. So this particular study was with 10 veterans doing a collaborative songwriting intervention. And they did a pre and post measure design. So they had these vets fill out I believe it was several different trauma screeners before and after the songwriting intervention. And they found that there was a significant reduction in PTSD symptoms, specifically symptoms related to numbing and hyperarousal. And there was a marginal reduction in depressive symptoms and stress reactivity. And about 90%, so 9 out of 10 of the participants said they would refer others to this treatment. So there's also, you can see in this, there's the symptomatic improvement, and there's also the treatment satisfaction factor, which is always a good thing to have. Substance abuse, songwriting can work well for people who are dealing with a substance use disorder as well. This particular study was done with 118 adults on a detox unit, and the study design was a cluster randomized, single session, 2-group, single measure design. Thanks for that, Silverman. So essentially, the control received assessment before the intervention, and the experimental group received assessment after the intervention. Due to the nature of an inpatient detox unit, this was just made the most sense. It was a blues-based songwriting experience, which we'll talk about later. And they found better scores with the experimental group. There's a significantly higher state pride with the songwriting group, and lower guilt and shame, but not significantly so. And songwriting can also work for end of life. This study was done with 104 patients across several facilities receiving palliative care with a prognosis of less than a year. And they were either randomly assigned to a music relaxation group or a song of life group. So a reminiscence and reflective songwriting experience. They found that Song of Life participants had significantly higher spiritual well-being and ego integrity, and significantly lower distress than the control group. And treatment satisfaction for participants and their family members was higher in the Song of Life group. So let's talk about songwriting generally as an intervention by the numbers. In 2008, 4 music therapy researchers distributed a 21-question survey to 477 music therapists across 29 countries to learn about the use of songwriting in music therapy. They found that 87% of music therapists use songwriting in their practice, with 39% of music therapists using songwriting 1 to 2 times or more per week. And then of the 18 goals that were cited by participants as their reasons for using songwriting interventions, some included enhancing social skills, enhancing quality of life, emotional expression, developing a sense of self, and validating experiences. So as you can see, there's a lot of different reasons you might use songwriting in a session for a variety of goals with a variety of different kinds of people. So now let's talk about some questions you might want to ask yourself while you are coming up with a songwriting intervention. Questions to consider are cognitive level. Is your client's cognition impaired? Is the goal for songwriting cognitive itself? Is the goal a cognitive one? And what level of structure is going to best support the client's cognitive needs? Sometimes, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but sometimes if you're dealing or you're working with a client who has a disorder that impairs cognition, like dementia or an intellectual disability, sometimes providing an experience that has a little bit more structure can set them up for success more. You also want to ask yourself if your client is coming in with prior musical experience or skills. If they are coming in with prior musical experience, how can you utilize that to enhance the songwriting experience? And if they come in with no experience, are they intimidated by songwriting? And how can you support them so that songwriting is an empowering experience rather than an anxiety-inducing one? You also really want to focus on what's the goal. I know that sounds simple, but sometimes I think as student music therapists, we just want to get out there and be like, I want to try a songwriting intervention at least once, while not really always thinking about if a songwriting intervention makes the most sense for the goal you're trying to meet? And is the songwriting strategy you're using making the most sense for the goal you're trying to meet? And then lastly, you want to think about whether this is going to be a group or individual songwriting process. Obviously, if it's one-to-one, that makes it a little easier to make sure you're touching base with that person in a very thorough way. But in a group process, you really have to be intentional about making sure that each client has their voice heard and is contributing to the process in a way that's meaningful for them. Ooh, songwriting strategies. There we go. So the first strategy we're going to talk about is close procedure, or Mad Libs, or lyric substitution. There are a lot of different names for this one. This songwriting strategy probably has the highest level of structure, but not as much freedom. And when we say there's not as much freedom, that doesn't mean there's not any freedom, just comparatively to some other strategies. And closed procedure you use with pre-written music and lyrics. So you want to take your client's preferences into account when choosing a song. And you also want to remember that the fill in the blank parts should be meaningful to the goal. You don't want to choose fill in the blank sections for like filler words. For example, one song that I use with closed procedure a lot is Fire and Rain by James Taylor, which you can see on this slide. So just the main lyric, right? I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I usually put the blanks on fire and rain. I wouldn't put I've seen fire blank rain. I've blank fire and rain. You know, you want to choose something where you're going to get a meaningful response. So yeah, some examples I provided for this. Megan actually will be able to speak to this because we were in this practicum together. But I did a closed procedure lyric substitution intervention to My Favorite Things from The Sound of Music at an assisted living facility for older adults with dementia, a group of about 10 to 12. The goal was communication, social goal, reminiscence goal. And because of the way this group ran, we paused in between. We played the song through as is first, and then we had them list their favorite things. We went around and got a favorite thing from most of the people. And then we basically just incorporated that into the song because the song's a little bit listy, if you know that song. And then another example is a one-on-one I'm doing right now in my internship, which is a forensic psych hospital. A client with schizoaffective disorder and a TBI. So there is both a mental health component and a cognition component to consider, which is why I chose closed procedure with a song that is often used in mental health settings, based on my experience. Blues songwriting, and if you're from CSU, you know that this is one of Dr. Andrew Knight's favorite songwriting strategies. And there's a lot of benefits to this songwriting strategy. It provides both musical and lyrical structure, but it has a little bit more freedom than closed procedure because you're writing a whole new song rather than building off an existing one. And the musical form does have restrictions, but there's little freedom in what key you pick. And in a group setting, you might use this alongside an improvisation experience. Give each client a chance to sing their blues, but when they're not singing, they can be improvising on an instrument, particularly a percussive instrument, might be helpful. And I have an example here. The lyrics are in AAA-B form. This is just a kind of easy way to do a blues songwriting experience, but it doesn't have to be this way. So now I'm going to ask for some audience participation. As you can see, I've got the blank blues. What kind of blues do we want to say we have? Pop it in chat, say it out loud. Give me an example. What kind of blues do we have?
The fall blues.
The fall blues. So you could, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you on my guitar, and hopefully this doesn't sound too weird over Google Meets. We'll find out, right? I got the fall blues. Yeah, I got the fall blues. I got the fall blues. Now we need to think of another lyric, so I'm going to stall for a little bit. Yeah, the leaves are falling off the trees, and I got the fall blues. So something like that, right? Um, Ideally, you might come up with a better B lyric, um, but I didn't. What did I do? Okay, there we go. And you're gonna want to use the 12 bar blues form for this songwriting strategy, obviously. Um, and if you can, throw some seventh chords in there. Don't just play some basic, A, D, E. Throw some A7s and some D7s in there. Be jazzy with it. Be bluesy with it. It is blues songwriting. All right, our next style of songwriting, our next songwriting strategy, I should say, is piggyback songwriting, which is also sometimes called parody songwriting. This provides a lot of lyrical freedom on the backdrop of a highly structured musical setup. But you can also adjust the level of lyrical structure by integrating this technique with closed procedure. You want to use the client's preferred music, maybe retain some original lyrics. This strategy can also be great from a liberation psychology perspective in rewriting songs that could be considered to be oppressive or only reflect the narrative of a dominant group. For example, if you're working with a queer client, you might take a heterosexual love song, change the pronouns, and rewrite some of the lyrics to reflect a queer experience rather than a heterosexual one. And this is also a great strategy for you to use when planning sessions. Using familiar melodies with new lyrics can be a super effective way to meet goals. I did this at a preschool with Old MacDonald Had a Farm, but instead of Old MacDonald Had a Farm, we did Old MacDonald Had a Band, and every kid had a different instrument. And when I would say their instrument, they would play it, and they loved it. It was a great time. All right, rap writing. This is very similar to freeform songwriting, but I wanted to talk about this separately just because I feel like, at least in my experience at CSU, we didn't really talk a lot about the potential for rap writing. And because I'm at a forensic psych facility in Baltimore, rap tends to be a preference for a lot of clients. So I'm basically just showing you the setup that we do at my internship site, which works really well and can be adjusted to be individual or group. This provides mostly a lot of freedom, but there's a little bit of structure because typically you're using a pre-made beat. If you want to provide less structure, you can make a beat with your client, which would be really fun. So the procedure that we use from the internship site is we introduce a theme to clients for their raps. For example, one week we did different words around the room, and they would pick one of the words, like there was, recovery, stigma, hope, loss, and they would pick one of those words or a few of those words to write off of. You can pick a word specifically, a phrase, a quote, a picture is super cool sometimes. We did a lyric analysis alongside rap writing to bridge over troubled water. That was cool. Then you play 3 to 5 beats for the clients and you have them vote on their favorite 2. You should select 3 to 5 ahead of time. And then while they are writing their raps, you play those 1 to 2 beats on loop. And you're going to give them at minimum 10 minutes to write their raps, free association style. You can adjust this to be more structured. And you're just going to play that on loop. If 10 minutes isn't enough, give them 5 more. Try not to go over 20 minutes though, and then have everyone share their raps. And it's a super effective way to help people, I find, with emotional expression who might not have had outlets for that in their life. Freeform songwriting, the most elusive form of songwriting, but also, according to research, one of the most used by music therapists. So what does that exactly mean? It's kind of exactly what it sounds like, but there's a lot of freedom and a very little amount of structure, which is why it can be scary for music therapy students who aren't already familiar with songwriting. The thing about freeform is it's great for clients who already have some musical skill or musical experience. It's not great for clients who need a little bit more structure. Maybe after you build rapport, maybe go here as a challenge, but I would not start off with this with a client who needs structure. So some strategies for freeform songwriting, and a lot of these strategies I pulled from my experience working at a community housing facility for formerly unhoused people as my level 4 practicum at CSU. So some strategies are to pair your freeform songwriting with lyric analysis or song discussion. And those ideas that come up during lyric analysis or song discussion, have a whiteboard, be ready to write those ideas down because those can be used as lyrics oftentimes because those are therapeutic insights that your clients are having. You want to remember those and you can use them in songs. Again, whiteboard is super helpful. You can come with a theme in mind and create a mind map with your client. You can come with a theme and have your client do some free association writing on their own, which is similar to the rap writing procedure that I just talked about. And then also another strategy that's just helpful is using your client's music preferences to inform the genre and structure of the song that you're writing with them. And I mean, just like if you were writing music on your own, you can either start with the lyrics or start with the music. So if you're starting with the lyrics, then maybe introduce 2 to 3 chord progressions and have your client pick their favorite. So that way you're offering that choice, but you're not overwhelming them with being like, what chords do you want? Like, who knows if they even know what a chord is? Or you can start with the music and see what lyrics arise for the client, such as doing a lyric analysis or a mind map. That can be a helpful way to start with the music and end with the lyrics. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about technology for songwriting. So why use technology for songwriting? Why not just focus on doing it in the moment? The short answer is we have technology, so we should use it. It's a great way to provide clients with a tangible takeaway of the work they've done in session, and it can be a great source of pride and empowerment for clients. There's a lot of software and hardware out there that's free or low cost and can enhance your practice as a music therapist. Yeah, I personally feel like it's your ethical responsibility as a music therapist or a student music therapist in the modern era to be familiar with songwriting technologies. And that's not me trying to be like, you're unethical if you're not up to date on your tech, because a lot of schools are not up to date on their tech syllabi. But the thing about that is Google is out there and it's super helpful. And I would consider myself pretty good at songwriting strategies, which is why I chose this presentation. And a lot of what I learned was through Google, through YouTube, on my own time learning. Not a ton of what I learned was in a classroom. So you can do it too. All right, types of DAWs. What's a DAW? I'm so glad that you asked. It is a digital audio workstation. A lot of what we talk about here is going to be going over the jargon in the recording technology world. My recommendation is to pick one, learn it well, and stick to that. And if you have the interest, time, and means, you can explore more. GarageBand is probably the most popular, and it's free if you have an Apple product. It's very intuitive and easy to use, and there's a lot of tutorials out there for it. Logic Pro X, this is my preferred one. It's similar to GarageBand, but it's better. It's one of the industry standards alongside Pro Tools. and I'm going to tell you all about a good deal right here. So Logic Pro is usually $200 on its own. Wow, what a price tag. I know, right? However, because you're all students, you can get the student bundle from Apple and get Logic as well as 4 other apps for the same cost, $200. I did it. I think it's worth it. Not everyone will think it's worth it, but I thought you should know. Ableton Live Lite, there's also a pro version, but this one's free. Ableton, there's a pretty significant learning curve with this one, and it's not the most visually pleasing software, but it's effective and it's time tested. And if you're trying to do DJing with a client, Ableton is the way you want to go. Pro Tools Intro, again, this one has free and pro versions. This is the other industry standard besides Logic. But keep in mind that the free version is limited to 8 tracks. So if you're trying to make a super complex song in Pro Tools Intro, maybe not the move. And like I said, if you're not sure where to start learning, YouTube is your best friend. YouTube is where I learned how to work all of these different DAWs. There's a lot of information out there, which can be difficult to sift through sometimes. But again, pick one that you think is going to be best for you and is the most accessible to you, learn it well, and rock and roll. All right. So capturing the sound. We're just going to talk very briefly about tech equipment. There are a bunch of different kinds of microphones. This list is not comprehensive by any means. But microphones, dynamic is probably the most versatile, not always the highest sound quality, unless you're talking about the best mic for a drum. And it does not require external power or phantom power, which we'll talk about. If you're a beginner to recording, I would recommend a dynamic mic or a USB mic. Condenser mics are a little bit more sensitive and a little bit more silly, but they're also great for capturing musical nuance. They also require phantom power, which is a little button you will press on an audio interface, which is also up there. But if you forget to press the button, you can like destroy your equipment. So be careful with condenser mics is the summary of the story. USB mics are self-explanatory, not the best, but they're cheap and accessible and they work. So great place to start. Recording equipment. An audio interface connects instruments and microphones to your computer. It acts as a bridge between digital and analog audio. We talked about microphones. You're also probably going to want some mic cables, unless you got a USB mic. Pop filter. This is for P and S sounds when singing, so you don't get that hiss with the S sounds when you're recording. And those are cheap on Amazon. We talked about DAWs. MIDI keyboards are great things to have. There's also several cheap ones out there on the internet. They make it easier to use MIDI instruments, which are the digital instruments that are loaded into DAWs. So let's say your client wants strings in a song. You don't have a full orchestra at your disposal, because very few of us do. You can use a MIDI to play the chords of the orchestra on the MIDI keyboard, and then select a string sound, and then you have strings in your song. So that's an easier way to get a wider range of different sounds in your client's songs. I have one, and I think it was $30, but don't quote me on that. A CD burner, if your computer or laptop doesn't have one. If you are a Mac user like me, unfortunately, they don't have CD burners, so you'll need a plug-in one. But if you got one of those old, really clunky laptops, those beautiful old things, that'll probably have a CD burner. Music storage, pretty self-explanatory. Digital files include MP3 and WAV. MP3 is the most standard. WAV is a slightly higher quality. I've never noticed that much of a difference. You also want to think about physical files. If you're gonna give your client a physical copy of their song. And the most two common ways to do this are a CD disk and a flash drive. For example, at my internship site, I would not be able to email email clients a digital file, MP3 or WAV, because that would be contraindicated. It just would not be something that we would do. It's against hospital policy. But you can give them a CD of their song. So in a lot of cases, if you're working in a low tech environment, you're going to want to learn how to use those physical components of music tech. All right, closing. I realize I talk super fast. Okay, so we did an intro to songwriting. We talked about why you might use songwriting in session. We talked a little bit about literature, some considerations when you're making a songwriting TME, some strategies for songwriting, and a little bit about using tech for songwriting. And now we are closing. Does anyone have any questions? It does not look like anyone has questions. All right. If you have questions and you just didn't want to say it out loud, here are my emails. You can reach me at either one of those. And here are my references. And I am also going to drop a link, a shareable link in the chat of this presentation, so that you can all reference it later if you so wish to. So yeah, thanks y'all.
Thank you so much, Gray. We will take about a 15-minute break. Get up, walk around, go to the bathroom, refill your water bottle, whatever you need to do. And we will come back at 11 and get started with our next presentation about music technology. Oh, I also have a QR code. Let me pull it up for us. If you will scan the QR code for me and let me know that you're here, we will be giving away a door prize at the end. All right, everyone, we will move on to our next presentation. For those of you who are just now joining us, my name is Hannah Rice. I am our Moram TAS president. I am currently in my internship at Cornerstones of Care in Kansas City, finishing up my degree at UMKC. And I'm so excited to share something that I have just started learning how to use, music technology. So at Cornerstones, we use a ton of music technology. And so I thought, why not share it with all of you? So a couple things that we'll talk about today. We will talk about types of music technology, how it can be used, how I use it, and then we will do an example of one of the games that we play with my kids at Cornerstones called Change One Thing. All right, so a little introduction. Using music technology in music therapy can significantly enhance the therapeutic experience for clients, allows personalized music interactions, enabling clients to engage with sound in ways that resonate with their individual preferences and emotional needs. Technologies such as digital instruments, recording software, and apps can facilitate creative expression, making it easier for clients to explore their feelings and communicate effectively. Additionally, these tools can help track progress over time, providing both therapists and clients with valuable insight into emotional and behavioral changes, ultimately fostering a deeper sense of connection and healing. So one way we use it at Cornerstones, like it says, to track improvement over time, is we have groups like beat making and songwriting where they get to come in and they can listen to their very first beat that they made, and then they listen to their last beat that they made after 8 weeks, and they can see how much they've grown over those 8 weeks. And the smiles on these kids' faces when they come in and they see how much they've grown is just so heartwarming. So number one, types of music technology. There are a ton, and I will go through them, but bear with me because there are a lot of different types of music technology. So we have creation and production apps and websites. GarageBand, like Gray mentioned, is a great one. FL Studio, Ableton Live, Logic Pro. Gray mentioned a bunch of these. The one that we use the most at Cornerstones is BandLab. It is a website that you get on. It is all online. It's saved online. All of the beats that are in it are already in the app. So it's all available and it's free. So it's something super accessible to anyone that has a connection to the internet and can use a computer. And then there is mobile apps that you can download on a tablet or a phone. BandLab has a mobile app. Soundtrap has a mobile app. There's an app called Beatmaker Go and an app called Launchpad. Composition and notation, using these more on the more of the music creation side, as in like writing sheet music and notating anything on sheet music. You have MuseScore and NoteFlight. Personally, I think that MuseScore is easier to use and more user-friendly, but there are tons more out there other than just MuseScore and NoteFlight, but these are my two personal favorites. There are a ton of different ways that you can learn music online. A couple of the easiest that I have come across are Musician, and then a sound healing app that I found on the iPhone. They're both super user friendly. Also, I just learned, if anyone didn't know this, because I didn't, Duolingo has a music portion of it. So not only can you learn Spanish and French, you can also learn music, which I think is super cool. I started using it the other day just to see how it works, and it is super easy and super thorough. Virtual instruments, Native Instrument, Complete Start, Spitfire Audio Labs, and then Serato. So Serato is really awesome. It is a DJ app. So you get on, it has two different like turntable type components to it. And you can take a song and put it in one turntable, and then you take another song and you put it in the other turntable, and then you can mix the songs together like a DJ. And it has all of the stuff that you can use to mix it on the website. And then in addition to that, you can get like Gray was talking about, like a MIDI piano or an actual turntable to plug into the computer and make it even more interactive, which I think is super awesome. Music listening apps. Everyone knows our favorites: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and then Pandora. Who even uses Pandora anymore? I don't know. But it's still like one of the top things that you that comes up when you look up music listening on Google. So I put it in here for you. And then music-based games. So Incredibox is a super cool game that you get on, and you have all of these different little people, and you make them make a sound, and there's 6 or 7 different sounds that you can make them do, and you can change them out and put them together, and they create a cute little like beatbox. Magic Tiles is very similar to the like phone app that was super popular a couple of years ago, where you like play the piano and you push the tiles, and then if you get it wrong, you start over. Blob Opera is super fun. They are these cute little squishy blobs that you make sing, and you can make them sing in harmonies and melodies, and they're super fun. Lo-Fi Room is my current favorite. Can you still see my screen? No, you can't. So I wanted to show you this. I have a lot of kids that when they come into the music studio, they don't necessarily want that day. They're not in the creative mood. And this is super fun. So they go in, and you click on the instrument, and then you use your keyboard to make the sound. As you can see, there's different instruments around the room, and as you play the different instruments, the instruments make a sound together. And then, in addition to that, you can go and you can go in and you can add your own like beat into the website, and then the website makes a game for you out of your beat, which I think is super, super cool. Okay. Okay, so how it can be used in a session. Creative expression, it's a very individualized and personalized creation that the client gets to come in. They create it themselves from start to finish, and it gives them that sense of accomplishment. And it is also an exploration of sounds, figuring out what they like, figuring out what they don't like, and creating their own ideas about what they want in music creation. Collaboration, so doing group activities and group projects. This is one of the main ways that we use it at Cornerstones. It is a good way to get active engagement out of a whole group, making a beat together, making a song together, creating something together, and then you share that sense of pride with your peer sitting next to you that you have just created something really, really awesome. Goal setting and tracking, like I mentioned, everything that you're making is a project-based learning style. So you are coming in, sitting down with a idea of what you are wanting to get done. We make all of our kids set a goal for the session. So they come in, they say, I want to get this beat completely done so that next week when I come in, I can write my lyrics and record my rap to the beat. So giving them that sense of learning how to create, goals, create lists of how they want to get stuff done, making steps to achieve those goals, helping with some of those life skills that they'll need after they leave our facility. And then the playback feature, so they get instant gratification and satisfaction from being able to hit the play button and immediately hearing what they have already made. Being able to hit the pause, change something they didn't like, hit play again. Oh, I love it. This time it sounds great. Relaxation and mindfulness. So, for example, I have one kid right now who really, 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 really likes progressive muscle relaxation, but he is embarrassed to tell people that he likes progressive muscle relaxation or do it in front of his peers. So he came into the music studio, we sat down, we created a very peaceful, waterfall sound with a little bit of lo-fi music in the background. He found a script online that he liked, and then he used the recording studio to speak the script into the waterfall sounds. And then we downloaded that onto his MP3 player so he can listen to that script in his ears without having to let anybody else know that he is listening to a relaxation tape. Or he can do it in his bedroom at night when he is getting ready to go to bed and he's super tense. Since we did that, I have noticed an amazing amount of stress lifted off of his shoulder. He's the type of kid that, always walks around. He's got his shoulders up in his ears because he's so tense. He's always, flexing his fists, and he started relaxing because he has that tool to help him kind of, calm down and relax. That doesn't necessarily have to be public, which I also think is super cool. And then skill development. So learning a new skill. It's always hard to come in and not be good at something immediately. So using your safety plan, taking some deep breaths, going back through and, figuring out exactly where you want to put a beat. And then if it comes to it, asking for help, which is really, really hard. Not only for the kids at our facility, but I mean, a lot of adults have a hard time asking for help too. So learning that skill of being able to be like, hey, Miss Hannah, I'm having a really hard time. I can't place it on the right beat. Do you think you could help me? Or asking a peer, hey, Joe, you think you could come over and help me? Miss Hannah's helping someone else and I can't figure out how to do this. And then that technology literacy, being able to use a Mac, being able to use a Dell laptop is something that is not going to go away anytime soon. So giving them a little bit of free exploration to go through and figure out how to use it is a big goal for us. Okay. I know I've talked about it a little bit of how I used it, but I have some main points. So creative expression is a big one. A little background information I don't think I mentioned. Cornerstones of Care is a adolescent mental health residential facility. So they live on campus. Music therapy is part of their treatment. They come down once a week, either in a group or in an individualized setting. So a lot of them get that sense of creative expression if they're in a beat making or a music making group. So I use BandLab a lot to let the kids compose and arrange their own music. They layer sounds, experiment with different instruments, and they can create tracks, or they can use pre-made loops in BandLab, like I mentioned earlier, and do whatever they would like. So I have a couple examples. Megan, I can see your face. Will you let me know if you can hear this? Oh. Okay. So this is a beat that one of my kids made strictly using loops. So he found loops in BandLab that he liked by going in and selecting that he wanted a beat with a hip hop sound, and then pulled the beat over. Then he went through unselected beat and selected synthesizer, found a synth sound that he liked and pulled it in. And he created this sound. He named it My First and Fire Beat. So they get pretty confident and cocky with it. This next one is one of my kids that I have in a rap group. His goal for our 8 weeks is to create a song start to finish by himself. So he has used a little bit of music sampling in this to start creating his beat, and he's so excited that next week he gets to come down and start rapping to it. I'm just going to play the beginning for you, but he found what he liked online and made his own.
J'habite seul avec maman. J'habite seul avec maman. J'habite seul avec maman. J'habite seul avec maman. Okay.
So, like I said, he sampled 2 different songs in that. The first one being, sorry, Miss Jackson. And then the second one being that like crowd kind of sound into the little bit of gibberish. He had a cousin who made music and would post it online, and that cousin had passed away. And he told me all about how grateful he was that YouTube existed and that he could see his cousin's face and listen to his cousin's music. And he wanted to honor him by adding that little bit of the beat into his music at the beginning of his song. So I'm super excited to hear what lyrics he has written, and I can't wait for him to record it. So collaboration in the studio, like I said, I use music technology, not just in an individual session, but also to promote collaboration among the kids. So helping them learn how to work together musically and creatively. And then the music technology allows for that real-time interaction and shared decision-making. So they have to come in, they have to decide what sounds good together. They all have to agree on it before they can put it into the beat. And then they have created something together as a group. And that is, a connection that not all of these kids live on the same dorm. And they get to come in and they get to be in a group with a kid from a different dorm, and they get to make things. And then, they go back to their group and they're like, hey, I got to make this really cool beat with so-and-so. Like, oh yeah, he's actually a really cool guy. I didn't know anything about him before being in this group, which is super, super awesome. So for example, change one thing, the little game that we're going to play with the people that I have in my room here at the end uses pre-made beats in BandLab, where the group members can either choose to change something about the beat or add something new. So at the end, you start with one beat, and at the very end, you have something completely new that sounds nothing like what you had at the beginning. Goal setting and tracking. So using music technology creates clear, achievable goals, and you get to track your growth over time, giving the kids that I work with the sense of accomplishment and motivation to keep improving, which is super awesome. The first beat that I showed you, his very first and fire beat, that was his first beat 4 weeks ago. Since then, he has now made 6 beats, and they just keep getting better and better and better as he goes. And more in depth, more creative, and it's awesome watching them grow, which is super cool. So like I said, my example is, our kiddos can look back and look at their first beat they made and see how long they have come. So it's a good reminder that not all progress is immediate progress, and you can't see it immediately. Some things you have to grow through. And then relaxation, like I mentioned. So using music technology to support relaxation techniques with kids, helping them wind down, manage stress through calming, creative activities. So these tools allow us to create immersive, soothing soundscapes and helps the kids engage in mindful listening and relaxation exercises. Like I mentioned, that client that I have, he wouldn't even tell me that he liked progressive muscle relaxation. His clinical therapist came and told me that he liked it. And he told her that he wanted to make a relaxation script, but was too embarrassed to tell everyone in the group that he was in that he wanted to make a relaxation script. So we did a group activity, everyone together, and then with his individual time at the end of the session, we made a relaxation session quietly. Okay. We're gonna do change one thing. Let me get set up here. Okay, so this is BandLab. So when you go into BandLab, you can either use down here at the bottom, it says BandLab sounds. These are all the pre-made loops that they have that you can add in. Or you can use the drum, the voice and audio. You can use the virtual instruments. You can have a drum machine, and it does it all for you, which is super cool. So we are going to do a little example of change one thing. So I have gone in and I have added 3 loops from BandLab already. They sound like this. So if I was a kid, I would sit down and the music therapist would say, okay, you can either change one thing about what is already on the screen, or you can add something new. And, you know, I don't know much about music, but I know that I don't want to change anything that's already in the beat. So I'm going to come over here to the loops, and I'm going to choose the kick drum, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to listen to some of the beats. And then when I'm ready, I'm going to come over and I'm going to drop it into my sound. And I'm going to make it the right length. And then okay. So now I've changed one thing. So now my next person is going to come. Caitlin, do you want to come add a beat?
All right.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to pick another instrument. I picked the kick drum. So what instrument would you like to use?
I'd like to do the shaker.
Perfect. And then you can click through some of the beats and find the one that you like. And when you're ready, we can add it in.
Okay.
And to stop it, you'll just pause it. If that's the one you like, we can add it in. If not, we can keep looking. Some of these sounds definitely sound very, very fake.
Yeah.
But some of them sound really good.
I think this one.
Look down. Okay, so we will grab it and drop it over here. Make it the correct length. And then we'll Nice. Are you ready? Okay, so we'll go back in to our instruments and we'll unclick shaker. And then which instrument would you like to use?
I'm gonna do strings.
And then we'll hit that button right there. Yep. And then just like Caitlin, you can click on them to hear the sound. Oh, that's pretty cool.
I like this one.
Okay, so we're going to drag it down right there.
Okay. Then
You'll drag it back. You'll click this little loop and
Okay.
drag. There we go. Okay, and then if you hit that button right there, that'll take us all the way back to the beginning. That's cool. Okay, so we're gonna mute these. This is what our beats sound like. So when we use this in our groups, it's always nice to have something to start with, like the 3 lines that were already in the beat. That way it's not as intimidating for the first person to come up and start choosing the beat. They have something to work off of. Say, I just didn't like, I'm kid number 4. I don't like this one. I'm going to go in and I'm just going to delete it. Didn't change that, but that would be their turn. They changed one thing, so you can change or add. So I'm going to reshare my screen. Does anybody have any questions for me? I know that I talked super fast, and I'm sorry, but that just means that we'll have an hour for lunch. No questions? Okay, I will drop my email in the chat. And if you have any questions, you are more than welcome to shoot me an email. And I appreciate everybody hanging out with us so far. We will, I'm going to end the call for now. We will join back up on this same link at 11:20, or sorry, 12:20. So I know me and Gray both talked super fast, but we will have an hour for lunch and we'll see you back then. Thank you, guys.
We actually fall into those neural pathways that elicit the hurt and the emotional connection. Compassion, however, is most closely associated with the networks of love and affiliation and affection. And so when we lean into our compassion, and I'll get to how we do that soon, we can find that endless capacity for love, that unconditional positive regard. And we can find that affiliation with the client instead of their struggle. Our natural tendency is to practice empathy. We as healthcare providers can live in vicarious pain. When we share our emotions, though, with our clients, we run the risk of emotional burnout. So burnout is going to be the physical or mental collapse caused by overwork or stress. Some associate this with words like compassion fatigue or compassion stress. Not quite the same in my idea. Burnout itself is a bit more of an umbrella term. Compassion fatigue is going to fall under burnout, but it's going to be specifically because we've been engaging in empathy without boundaries for too long. Then mindfulness is the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something, our surroundings, ourself. And mindfulness is one of those key components to burnout, because we have to develop an awareness of what it looks like for us. And I'll, again, laying the groundwork here. We'll talk more about these things later. But we have to lay a foundation of awareness so that we can know what burnout looks like in us, and what compassion fatigue looks like in us, and what empathy versus compassion looks like in us. And then, of course, neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to basically rewire itself. So many people say that practice makes perfect, but I challenge that, because if we're practicing something wrong, or if we're practicing something one way, maybe not wrong, but in one way, we'll continue doing it that way. So I use the phrase instead that practice makes permanent. The things that we practice and the way that we practice it becomes how we engage with the world. And so the process of neuroplasticity is how we change that. the way that I talk about sympathy, empathy, and compassion as our responses to stressors or to a client's, uh, let's see, a client's experience. I don't know why I have these animated. Beautiful. So again, our sympathy, I talk about it like a marathon in the desert. Okay, so our sympathy is going to be sitting at home watching on the television, saying, I swear like a sailor. I apologize. Our I'll try and reel it back, but I caught myself there. Our sympathy is sitting at home watching the television, saying, "Wow, that's horrible. Look at them running that marathon in the desert. That looks so hot. I'm so glad I'm not there. That sucks." Our empathy is when we try to run the marathon with them. I've never trained for a marathon. I've never trained for that marathon. I don't even have good running shoes right now. Like I can't do that. The furthest I've run is a half, right? That's 32 or whatever, 30, so I don't know, math. That's a lot of miles that I haven't trained for. And it's in the desert. It's hot down in Houston, but that's a muggy heat. Desert, that's a dry heat. I'm not going to be able to breathe, right? I can't go there. Our compassion is going to be sitting on the sideline, cheering. We've got our little placards, you've got this. And then we get in our car and drive to the halfway mark, and we have our little gummy snacks, and we give them protein, and we give them water, and we point to where the bathroom is. And then we get back in our car and we drive to the end, and we stand at the finish line cheering and yelling, and we have more little gummies and we have more little water. So you can see within that example how when we lean into compassion, it doesn't feel hopeless, right? We can see where our clients are going. We can see them running the marathon. We as the healthcare providers have the tools. We as the healthcare provider have the boundaries. Klemecki, Lieberg, Lahm, and Singer in 2013 conducted a study where they did brain scans and surveys to measure affective plasticity in healthy adults. They were able, or basically they came up with this idea that when participants reacted with negative affect before training, compassion training, they continue to fall into those negative pathways, those hurtful and harmful and painful. But when we engaged our client, or when they engaged the participants in compassion training, it elicited a positive neural network. So the brain regions previously associated with positive affect and affiliation were fully leaned into. This really suggests that the deliberate cultivation of compassion can offer new coping strategies that can really foster positive affect, even when we're confronted with the distress of others. Oh, all right. We're going to go next. No, we're not. Oh, no. Did the screen just go blank for you? I have no idea what that is. Oh, yes, I do. It's Brene Brown. We're not going to watch this video right now. Sorry, a video just popped up for me. I don't think it went to that screen for y'all. There's a video that I can show y'all later if we need to. Oh my gosh, it's not progressing. There we go. Okay, so why music? I only include this slide because so often we need reminders of why we do what we do. We need reminders of our reasons. If we can make our reasons concrete, then even on the hardest day, we can remind ourselves why we do what we do. Regina Spektor came out with a song years ago called Firewood. And it goes, the piano is not firewood yet. They try to remember, but still they forget that the heart beats in three, just like a waltz. Nothing can keep you from dancing. It's this beautiful reminder that our bodies are music. Every person we meet is a new verse. Every obstacle we overcome is a new chorus. Every relationship we start is the bridge. Every time we take a breath is a new line. It's our job as the clinicians, as the music therapist, not to make that song happy. Remember that. It's not to make that song this joyous, joyful song. It's to make the song beautiful. It's to make the song exactly what it needs to be for where the client is at. Our job is never to make someone happier. That might be one of the goals that they set for themselves, right? But we don't make them happy. We give them the tools to explore and find and develop happiness on their own. Perceptions of and emotions surrounding birth, life, death, dying, they're all continuums. They're based on our relationships with our religion, our society, our culture, our family, ourselves. And within each of those categories, we share music. Religious music, from hymns to chants, society with the Billboard top hits, our culture with certain rituals and dances, our family when we just listen to the radio in the car, and ourselves, of course, those preferences that we can share with others, our favorite music, our favorite songs, our favorite artists, our favorite genres. We, as music therapists, know all of the ways that music affects the body, that music affects the heart, that music affects the soul, that music affects the brain. I'm not going to get into those today. But I do want to share this quote from Oliver Sacks from his book Musicophilia, which if you haven't read, it's a bit older, but Oliver Sacks is a brilliant neuroscientist and is a proponent, he passed away, I believe, a few years ago, but he said rhythm and its entrainment of movement and often emotion, its power to move people in both senses of the word, may well have had crucial and economic function in human evolution, bringing people together, producing a sense of collectivity and community. Music just works. We know that it's powerful. So I want to get into the techniques of compassionate care. I don't remember who this quote is, but really should have found that out before I presented today. I just don't know. Annan for today. To be kind is more important than to be right. Many times what people need is not a brilliant mind that speaks, but a special heart that listens. At the end of the day, sometimes all we are called to do is be present. We don't have to pull out all the interventions. We don't have to sing the right song. Sometimes we just need to be there. Our first extremely important technique of compassionate care, how we lean into compassion, boundaries. As Casey Davis, a therapist from Houston, she's on TikTok and social medias as at Domestic Blisters. She's fabulous, fantastic. Wrote a book called How to Keep House While Drowning. She has an entire series about boundaries. And the way that she defines boundaries is boundaries are not the line that we draw, but they are how far we are willing and able to go. Boundaries are never a request. So if I were to say, you can't speak to me that way, that's a request. Boundaries only have to do with my actions. A boundary there would be, if you continue speaking to me that way, I'm going to leave, right? It's a conditional, this is the situation and this is what I'm able to give. Hanser in 2016 talked about patients as companions and the therapist as a guide, with music therapy as the container. We're not impervious to the world just because we help others. We are diverse practitioners and clinicians, and we often doubt ourselves and doubt our prospective modalities. Give yourself a break, right? Remember your boundary. You can only go so far. You can't work harder than your client. Next, Oh, yeah, sorry. Know your limits. You can't work harder than them. Next is clinical supervision. You are not and never will be an island. One of the most important things I truly believe for therapists is to find community. I'm not saying that you have to join AMTA. I'm not saying that you have to join, do the things, but I'm not saying that you have to join those. Find someone local. Does it have to be a music therapist? Not necessarily, but find people in the healthcare field who get it. Find people who are similar in style to you who get it. Join actual supervision groups. Receive actual supervision. It's different than just venting with your friends. Supervision itself is compassion. It's not just putting everything on the table and leaving it there. It is constructive, goal driven, and productive time with the supervisor or peer supervisor. Practicing mindfulness. Again, mindfulness is so important. It is the foundation of how we stay engaged, of how we know what our boundaries need to be. We need to listen to hear. We need to step away from our notes, step away from our screen. Don't think about what's just happened or what's happening next. We begin to stretch ourselves so thin, trying to do it all and trying to remember everything and trying to bring it all in. We're like a rubber band and we break, right? Focus on yourself. Bring it back in. Count your breaths, count your steps, take your pulse. We can't empathize with an abstract or detached feeling. We need to have a basic knowledge or would love to have an intimacy with someone or where they are headed. We need to be able to see in this moment what our client is experiencing. My supervisor called it spot assessment, and music therapy at large calls it the ISO principle, right? We meet our client where they're at. I can't tell you how many of my hospice sessions were just held with me going over and listening to the breathing pattern for a client for a moment, and then singing preferred music to their breath in rhythm with them, so that when they were breathing, we were on a phrase together, right? I can't tell you how often I take a pulse so that I can do entrainment. Practicing appreciation or gratitude is kind of the next step of one of the next step of mindfulness. Again, we're building those neural pathways, right? We're understanding that we are drawn as humans evolutionarily because of the negativity bias to the negative, right? Evolutionarily, the cave people, right? For every one threat that they had in an environment, they needed at least 5 positives just to balance, right? So if there was a bear, they needed a shelter, they needed community, access to food, access to water, and access to place to use the bathroom safely, right? Those basic human functions. No, we don't necessarily have to worry about the bears anymore, though yes, we would choose the bear. But we do have our bosses sending us an email. We do have our clients having a crisis. We do have paying taxes, right? And for every one negative, we need 5 positives just to balance. Research is now showing us that we need, especially for neurodivergent brains, we need upward of like 25 to 30, sometimes even more, just to balance. Not to feel good, not to feel great, but just to balance there. So keeping that in mind, when we are able to practice appreciation and practice our gratitude, we are able to see the world in a different light. And this can be of ourselves, it can be of those around us. We do this through humor, through nutrition, through recreation, through our hobbies and exercises and body movement and prayer and music and meditation and anything outside the workplace we can find gratitude for. And then when we're in the workplace, there are even more things that we can find gratitude for. And no, I'm not saying that we filled our toxic positivity bubble, because that's going to form and it's going to float us up higher and higher and higher. And as soon as we don't think about the negatives anymore, one thing's going to come through, burst our bubble, and we're going to fall, right? So this is all about taking a balance. It's all about understanding that with the good, there is bad. A mentor of mine, a supervisor of mine, calls it living in the and. Jen over at Joyful Noises LLC, she's great. She calls it living in the and, the good and the bad, the happy and the sad. That's being mindful. We're bringing it back to the present and understanding the full depth and spectrum of our environment. We're not falling completely into the negative, which leads directly to burnout. We're not falling into completely the positive, because that leads to burnout. We're finding a healthy balance for ourselves. Mantras, again, I use the word mantra very specifically. It would probably honestly be more apt in this space to use the word affirmation. Mantras are going to have a spiritual or religious connotation to them. So just keeping that in mind for the future. But mantras and affirmations, like we had at the beginning, Loka samasta sukino bhavantu. Other affirmations could be, I am peaceful. I know what I am doing. I will succeed today. I will succeed in this situation. Acting against inequality. The systems that we are in, and when there is despair between groups, it is so much easier to develop the outgroup phenomenon and look down on others. Keep this in mind when you're helping your people and working with your people. We are all humans dealing with humanity in different ways. Critical psychology, or enacting social change as a means of preventing, understanding, and treating psychopathology, and liberatory psychology aims to actively understand the psychology of the oppressed and impoverished communities by conceptually and practically addressing oppression, are so important to our work. Therapy cannot be apolitical. We, outside of our sessions, healthily and with boundaries, need to fight to change systems that are worsening our clients' experiences and our own experiences. I had a woman who was in a nursing home, and she was just in so much pain. And I'll share the music therapy story, and then I'll share the political story. She had a tumor in her gut, and her intestines were wrapped around the tumor. She was always in pain. But she was a Black woman with a history of addiction. And the providers in the facility leaned so heavily into that narrative that this woman was not receiving the care that she needed. They called me one day because she was just screaming in the nursing home. Basically, not actually locked in her bed, but just trapped, locked, stuck in her bed alone, lights off, blinds closed. So I walked in, and y'all, I pulled out every trick in my book. I was doing entrainment. I did the ISO principle. I was doing alternate engagement stuff. I was doing relaxation stuff. I was doing instrumental play. I was doing everything that I could think of. And finally, I just sat there and felt so helpless. I was beating myself up in this moment where I wanted so deeply and so badly to be able to provide relief for this client. And then it hit me, Grant, what are you doing? Go get help. I told my client, I'll be right back. And I went and I found the med cart and I said, hey, client in room X, Y, and Z is really in pain right now. And I know that you hear this. I know you hear her. When is her next medication available? And the med cart looked and she was like, oh, well, you know, she was available a while ago. And so we can come and bring it to, I said, okay, let's prioritize that. Thank you. And I went back to the room. And again, this woman is just screaming and screaming and crying. And we're waiting for the med cart and waiting for the med cart. And I noticed she was, as she was screaming, she was going, ah, ah. And she had crosses everywhere in her room. And from her history and background, I knew she was religious, Southern Baptist. And so the first song that came to my brain when I heard was I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. And every time, I'll fly away, oh, I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. And she started singing with me. And we had to start over a lot, and that's okay. But then eventually we got to the first line, and then we got 2 lines, and then we got the first verse, and then we got the chorus in there. And then we were singing together. Through her screaming, we were able to fall into the song, and she held my hand and I held hers and she squeezed. And then I grabbed a maraca and put it there and she shook it. And then the med cart came and we did the business. And then when I left, I went directly to my supervisor and I said, look, we've got to do more for that woman. We have got to figure out what's going on. We've got to make sure that her meds are being administered appropriately, or else we need to make a report. Right. And when I say that we have to act against inequality, I'm not just talking about going to vote, which is very important. Go vote. I'm also talking about daily. I'm also talking about when we see something, say something. Because if I had to do that every friggin' time, I'm gonna be useless. I'm gonna be exhausted. We need to change the systems. And then finally, as music therapists, we are so good at this. Get creative. Part of being mindful is being curious. Curiosity and creativity help because they allow you to realize there's more. We think outside the box. We let the client help us lead. This helps us avoid the negative autopilot because we're putting the brakes on that autopilot and taking over for ourselves. When we begin to rework the way that we think, we begin to train ourselves. Research shows us that it takes 30 to 70 days to form a habit. An average of the current research has found that it takes at least 160 minutes of consecutive meetings with consecutive behaviors to change a first impression. So as we're developing these habits for ourselves, we're also making a first impression for ourselves. We need to be consistent in the new behavior. We need to be consistent in establishing our boundaries. We need to be consistent in receiving supervision and practicing mindfulness and practicing gratitude, practicing our affirmations, practicing. We're not going to get it right every time. That's not what this call is for. You're gonna fail, right? But that's where the self-compassion comes in. That's when we give ourselves the grace to fail and understand that we can't be perfect. I'm gonna go. We're kind of what time are we done?
125, I believe.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So we have like 13 more minutes. I'm gonna kind of boom, boom, boom. Okay. Um, but this slide is from the book Burnout: The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. Doctors Nagoski. If you haven't read it, I full-heartedly recommend this as a book for everyone to read. It's predominantly written for individuals who identify as a woman, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to get something from it if you are not female identifying. I can't love the book enough. I can't recommend it enough. It goes through and talks about the actual things, the societal problems that lead to stress and burnout. It talks about what stress is, what stressors are, how to complete the stress cycle. They talk about it as though it's a tunnel. And if we don't do the things to get through the tunnel, we get stuck in the darkness. They give really concrete, professional, and beautiful tools to practice in order to combat burnout. One is a doctoral choral director, and the other is a clinical psychologist and sex therapist. And so they kind of talk about the body and the brain in really holistic and beautiful ways. The tips that they give, and again, I'm just going to bump through these. Exercise and moving your body. This doesn't mean that you have to go for a run, right? But like, if you evolutionarily, again, if that bear was there, what are you going to have to do? You've got to run, right? How do we handle the stress of paying our taxes? Sure, you can go for a run. You can dance in the living room. You can do chair yoga. You can do some stretching. You can do some jumping jacks. You can just walk down the hallway and walk back. You can roll down the street or roll back. You can do whatever feels comfortable and right for you. You just need to be moving your body. Our body doesn't think in thoughts. Our body doesn't think in terms of, oh, my boss just yelled at me. Our body just feels. They talk about how our body only speaks one language, and that is body language. So again, we need to build the awareness and the mindfulness to begin speaking our body's language. Engaging in positive social interaction, right? Just like the supervision stuff, we've got to connect with our people who get us. We've got to be engaged with them. This is one of the best ways for our bodies to understand that the world can be a safe place when we are with people we love and who love us. Breathing is going to be really effective when the stress is a little bit lower, or when you need a really quick fix to kind of like get the tension right off the most immediate tension. The most important thing about breath work is to calm down. You're going to want to focus on your exhale, right? So if you're doing the box breathing, you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 8. Generally, a lot of people say breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, but don't do that. 4, 4, 8. Because our exhales are what activates our parasympathetic nervous system, and that's what comes and calms everything down. And the opposite of that, breathing in, activates our sympathetic nervous system, which ramps everything back up. So we need to focus on the exhale. Laughter. This isn't just like a or like the air snort that we give when we see a funny meme or a video, right? This is like a deep, authentic belly laugh. Watch your favorite movie, watch an old cartoon, watch the Three Stooges, watch something that's going to make you cackle, right? We need it. Have y'all ever done, I can only see one face, but if y'all have never done a laughing square, you should. It's where, if you feel comfortable with your people again, right? You put your head on the belly of the person behind you, who puts their head on the belly of the person behind them, and you just put your head on everybody's bellies, and then one person starts laughing and your head bounces, and I'm laughing right now just thinking of it, right? And then everybody's just shaking and bouncing and laughing on the floor, and it sounds horrible because you have to touch people, but sometimes we need to touch people. Speaking of affection, affection, y'all know the term oxytocin well. That's our love hormone, right? That's what's going to come in and help us feel connected. We're going to want to go a little bit deeper than just casual connection. Example from the Nagowski sisters is giving the 20-second hug, right? 20 seconds for the hug. In 20 seconds, that's when the oxytocin really starts going, right? There's another tool that they use, and it's a 6-minute kiss. So if you have a partner, kiss them for 6 minutes every day. See what happens. Crying, just as important as laughter is, crying is also important. We need to let it out. Tears have the same chemical component as sweat. When our body needs to sweat, it's going to sweat, and we allow that to happen. When our body needs to cry, we allow it to cry because that needs to happen. You can use a movie or a song or a sad story. Allow yourself to cry. Going through emotions that someone else is experiencing helps you get through the tunnel as well. And remember, we have to get through the tunnel. So if you have a sad day, if you have a hard day, if you have an angry day, do something that helps you get through that tunnel. And then again, creative expression. We are experts at creative expression. This could be playing a song, this could be drawing, this could be painting, this could be all of the above at one time, right? But we've got to get creative. We have to get creative because creativity helps us with flexibility. Flexibility helps us not feel stuck. I want to open the floor to questions, and then if we have time, we can go through examples of interventions that you can use for yourself. Playlist suggestions are here with like songs that you could use on the playlist, or you can make a playlist specifically related to an emotion or a color. I personally have playlists I make 3 playlists a year. So I make a spring, summer, and fall playlist. And whenever I need to feel how I was feeling at that time of year in that year, I know that my 2018 playlist is super sad and depressing. I know that my 2021 playlist is one of the happiest and most joyful and most beautiful playlists that I have for myself. And when I need a happy, beautiful, joyous moment, I go to summer 2021. It's important to give ourselves opportunities and permission to feel. So that's the presentation. I really hope that was helpful. I hope that you're able to see the freedom that Loka Samasta Sukino Bhavantu was talking about, the joy and the happiness that we are allowed to be free and do what we need to do to find, as this quote says, love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity can't survive. So that you can find what you need to survive. I see a question by Annabelle.
Hi, I'm Annabelle, but the question's for Claire over here. I don't know if you can see,
Yeah.
Our camera is on the President MTSA screen.
Let me see.
So I don't know if you
I
can
see it.
us.
Others. Oh yeah, I see someone waving now. Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
Annabelle, that's Claire. Claire has a question.
Hi, Claire.
My name is Claire. I'm wondering, why don't you make a winter playlist? Why just 3?
Oh, so yeah, so my fall playlist becomes a winter playlist. It was just easier for me to have enough songs on 3. I realized that I was stretching myself a little too thin with 4, because I don't just add any song. I like them to be very intentional. So it made more sense to, and it's not like I say, oh, it's April, so I gotta cut it off and start my summer playlist. No, I just like, it's a vibe, I guess. Like, you just gotta figure it out. But again, if you want to try out 4 playlists, or if you just want a winter playlist, go for it. Or if you just want a end of the year, this is how I felt this year playlist, whatever you need it to be. Any other questions or anything? Yeah, Megan.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how you found that being a licensed professional counselor and being a music therapist has helped your career on like
Yeah,
both sides of the spectrum.
absolutely. So I do not suggest grad school unless you have a goal, right? If you know what you want to go for, do it. If you don't, practice, right? Um, get in the field. I was working in hospice as my first job out of school, and started a hospice program for Heart to Heart. And over, oh, good gracious, when was that? It was before the pandemic. So about 2018, I took over as part-time music therapist and part-time bereavement coordinator. And I realized that through my work as the bereavement coordinator, which was so beautiful because I wasn't just working with my clients who were dying anymore, I was also working with their families, learning how to live again. So I realized I wanted to be able to go deeper, and I didn't necessarily feel stunted as a music therapist, but I wanted to be able to do the trauma work. I wanted to be able to get in there and really get my hands dirty, right? And so it made a lot of sense for me to be able to shift over and be more intentional in the way that I was practicing. And now I combine them all the time. I use music therapy in so many of my sessions. I generally only practice as a counselor because I can get reimbursed by insurance for that. But I still bring in and incorporate music therapy interventions and techniques and experiences into my practice. So and it all spurned from just wanting to be able to go deeper. Any other questions? Okay, so my email is here. It's grant@milsteadcounseling.com. You're more than welcome to email me. Like I said, I will send the PDF of these slides in. I also have the lot of references and some book recommendations here. And then of course, AMTA stuff. But yeah, just as a quick heads up, the One Song of Pink that I use is based on the practice called 20 Minutes of Red, where you sit down in a room and you, for 20 minutes, write down everything that you see that's red. But the way that I use that as a mindfulness intervention as a music therapist is I pick a color and then I use a song associated with that color, and I have people write down everything that they see in the space around them that is that color, and it just helps get integrated into the space and orient you to where you are and what's going on in that moment. And I used to use blue skies, but as soon as Chapel Roan spread like wildfire, I started using Pink Pony Club. So I was going to do that with y'all today, and hope that you're able to go do that for yourselves as a practice. Beautiful. Well, thank y'all so much for having me. I am so happy anytime I receive an email with questions. Let me know if you have any questions, concerns, need advice on things, especially as a student. I love my role as a supervisor and wouldn't give it up for anything. So hit me up if you need anything. And otherwise, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the mic back over. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grant, and thanks so much for just taking the time to be here. We really appreciate it. I know that I definitely found that very valuable, all the things that you were sharing, and even the just thinking about how we are all humans dealing with humanity, that really stood out to me. So thank you again for sharing. And let's see, it is 27. Should we take like 5-minute break, 3-minute break? What are we thinking, Hannah? 3-minute break? Okay, so we'll see you all back at 30, and we'll get started with our first student presentation.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much again, Grant.
All right, everyone, we're back from our really fast break, but just 2 more presentations and then we'll be done. So I will be presenting next, so I don't really need to ask someone to give me an introduction because I'm already here, but thank you. Looks like Maryville University has raised a hand. Yes.
Yeah, so you can't see me. I'm like over here. But
Sure.
we have another event that we have to go to, so we're gonna sign off. But thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started with this next presentation. I will be presenting on music technology, and we had a few other presentations that also sort of touched on that too. So let's get started, and I will share my screen. All right. All right, can everyone see it okay? Hopefully. All right. All right, so today we're going to be talking about pediatric music therapy and the role of music technology in that particular setting. So before we kind of get started, I want to hear from you. I want to hear, what are your thoughts about music technology? So if you were to think of music tech, what is like 1 to 2 words that might come to mind? You're welcome to raise your hand or put it in the chat, whatever feels best to you. Garage band, yes, yes. Difficult to use. Yeah, technology can become complex and frustration. Expensive, that's true. Very true, especially if you want like really good equipment. Confusing. Yeah, it can be so many things. Appreciate all of your sharing that. And yeah, I definitely share in those challenges of it being kind of confusing and being expensive, which isn't necessarily the best. I wish it was less expensive, but we'll get into some of that as we go. So we'll be exploring today uses within medical music therapy for music technology. We'll talk about some clinical considerations, some examples of a therapeutic music experience that could be used in this setting, some legal and ethical considerations, and then also some few little tips of getting started with music tech. So when we're talking about like the music therapy methods, music technology can be used in almost any of these methods. We talked a lot about today already with like songwriting, and I think some other ways that it might be used could be like beat making, like Hannah was talking about as well. You could even create like loops if some of you are familiar with that, and create like a guided imagery or mindfulness like track in the background. It could be used for music listening. For clients maybe who have like physical conditions or physical disabilities that make playing instruments difficult, you might have like switches or controls that they can use instead that still allows them to be active with their music making. And you can also use things like apps. There's so many out there that can be used within music therapy, and also MIDI instruments, which are in some of those digital audio workstations and other apps as well, which we sort of explored a little bit. And then, especially within the hospital setting, some things that we might see are legacy projects and amplified cardiopulmonary recordings. And sometimes the legacy projects might sort of overlap with some of those amplified cardiopulmonary recordings, or also known as heartbeat recordings. So just to kind of give some examples today of some different technology, I have with me the Littman Core stethoscope, which looks like this. Basically looks like your typical stethoscope, except the only difference is that it has this little section right here which has, I don't know how well you can see it because it's kind of small, but I can turn this button. There's a button here that I can turn on and off, and that allows it to connect with Bluetooth. So I could connect it to the Echoes app, and the Echo app is available on like both iPad and iPhone, and that allows you to record someone's heart rate, and you can visually see it as well. And then you can take that sound, that audio recording, and put it into a DAW, or you could put it like into GarageBand and kind of work with it there. So an example of this is my heartbeat, so no worries about sharing a client something or other, but here's what this sounds like. And as you can see, it kind of has that, you can see the heart rate really well, like what it looks like. So you could even use that if you were going to create, something that you wanted to give to a family or client, especially if, that client passed away, and you could use it to create a visual or some sort of like art thing that they might be able to take away as well as part of a project. So some other like specific examples of music technology being used in the music therapy literature, especially within a hospital setting, are things like pacifier activated lullaby, which would be used for NICU infants to help promote non-nutritive sucking. And so infants can then entrain to these lullabies, and you can also record as well with them. So like the mother or a father or other parent or caregiver could record a song, a lullaby, and then that could be used with that particular infant. And then, of course, we always have music listening and portable devices. There's also adaptive use musical instrument, which involves camera tracking of body movements or gestures, and it uses those movements and gestures to then create music. So that's kind of an interesting one, especially if someone has more physical disabilities. Thumb Jam is an app that within the music therapy literature has been used for stroke rehabilitation and some other things like that. And then, of course, we can use music technology to involve family as well as clients, especially if it's a platform or device that can be sort of shared between a bunch of different people, or a bunch of people can use it at the same time. So some clinical considerations with music technology would be to always look at what's going to be the most accessible and comfortable for the client to use, and considering those clients' specific needs. So that might look like sensory needs. Would a particular piece of music technology be overstimulating, or might it help a client kind of get that sensory stimulation that they need? Or that might look like, again, motor or physical challenges that maybe we need to think about with music tech. It could also be some emotional things. It could be cultural considerations as well. So if a client, for example, is from another culture and they really like the music of that culture, music technology kind of opens more doors to have some more access to some of those instruments, those more unique instruments that we might not have necessarily at our fingertips. And so that could then be used to create songs or whatever would be appropriate for that client, but then also being cognizant and careful of how you're using that and how you're approaching that culture and their music with sensitivity. And also, we should consider what types of technology are best given the setting, and different settings and sites have different requirements for what should or shouldn't be used and different policies, so always looking at that. Also considering if there are any contraindications for a particular client. So for example, with epilepsy, sometimes that can be contraindicated, and we might see that in the medical setting. So if someone was like using a lot of music on the computer, or sometimes music itself can sort of activate some of that. So just being mindful of some of those sort of things. And then I think another thing that's important is considering if the music technology is going to help increase motivation for the client as they're progressing towards their goals, or could it create more of a distraction? For example, if you gave a child an iPad, would they just want to go off and do all the different things on the iPad versus engaging in music therapy? Or is there a way that you can incorporate music technology while still staying true to what you need to be working on with that particular individual? And then, of course, because technology can be both frustrating, as some people said in the chat, as well as kind of exciting and opening a lot of doors, we want to make sure that we're not just using technology for technology's sake with a client. So we need to make sure that those goals are always client-centered. So we're going to explore an example today of looking at Chrome Music Lab's Songmaker. Kind of combined some words there. But this is an online resource, an online music tech resource that has, it's completely free. It's accessible as long as the device has internet access. It's also a very colorful design and very easy to use interface, which would be really nice with children, so especially in that pediatric medical setting. And songs are shareable via a URL link, so that also can be helpful as well. Limitations would be that you can only input one note at a time, and you have to like manually adjust. If, let's say, a client was singing a little higher or something and you wanted to, allow that to be part of the song, then you'd have to move it. And we'll look at that a little bit as well here. An example of like a goal and objective you might use would be to increase familiarity with the hospital environment. So there are a lot of different things within a hospital room, and that can be kind of intimidating. It can be kind of scary, especially for children, and it might produce some anxiety, a sense of just everything being unknown and different and like what is going on. So with that, if we can get the client to interact with something new in the environment or in their room, that might help them eventually have some more familiarity with it and maybe even a little bit more acceptance with it as well. So we might be using these items in the room, such as like a vital signs monitor or just sounds and different beeps in the environment, and use that to create a song or create a song around that. So let's explore a little bit. We would kind of, talk about maybe some of those things like opening the conversation with curiosity and discussing what's in the room, offer the ideas of song making, and kind of go from there, eventually processing the experience with the client. So here's an example. So obviously I'm not in a hospital environment, I'm just in an apartment. So I use my microwave in order to kind of capture a beep with the microphone feature on Chrome Music Lab's Songmaker. So the pitches were B, and they are shown in those pink notes there. And so I used that as a basis to just get those notes down. And then after that, I was able to just fill around the pitches with whatever I wanted. So with kids, you might say, oh, here are those pink pitches. Oh, that's the sound of the vital signs monitor. Oh, should we add some other pitches around that? Or maybe they want a specific color. So you can kind of play around with that. And here's what that sounds like. And as you can hear, it keeps looping. So that's another thing we'll talk about, where we could use this as a basis for something else, since it's already just going and looping. All right, and it has a lot of ways that you can change things. You can change the instrument to piano, and like you can change the percussion down here to so many different things. So it has a lot of features, even though the interface itself looks fairly simple. All right. So now let's take a moment to try it together. And unfortunately, Google Meets doesn't have a way to allow everyone to interact, although that is possible on Zoom. So if you were ever using this with a client over Zoom, you would be able to do this. But an example would be that I can press the microphone feature here. I'll show you how that works. So if, let's say that's my pitch of the vital signs monitor. And it'll keep going, and I could sing anywhere I wanted, and it'll easily pick it up. So we might have these different, let's say these are the beeps here, all those red notes, and then we might invite some curiosity of, oh, what can we play with around that? You can add different pitches, or maybe a client just wants to like make a shape. You could do that. You could make a little something there. And then you could also add some like beats as well if you wanted to. So we could have something like let's see, this. Depending on what the client wanted to do. And you can also change it to be like pentatonic. You can change it to be major or minor. If you wanted to adjust the pitches, I'll show you what that looks like really fast. You can go to settings, and then you can just change the range here from 1 octave, 2 octave, 3 octave, and then you can change it from low C, middle C, or high C. So depending on the pitches of whatever equipment might be in the room or in whatever area you're using this in, that would be what you would need to do. All right, so let's keep going. Some possible adaptations. So with music technology, it offers a lot of different ways that we can adapt it. So that might look like, depending on the app that you're using or whatever, like for example, with the adaptive use music instrument, you might, which is that camera tracking app, you could set it so a client could choose whatever sort of sounds they want. Like they could have different kinds of percussion that they move their body and it tracks it. And they might choose to use their face instead, and like you can blink and it'll also play music as well, depending on how they're moving. So there are lots of features like that depending on the app or resource you're using is adaptable. Specifically for Chrome Music Lab Songmaker, like I said, you can use it over some virtual platforms. So if this is allowed by the hospital or whatever setting you're a part of, this might be helpful because you could interact with your client over that virtual platform, or you could even include like family, especially if they were like long distance or siblings, anything like that. So that's a really useful feature. And even just with technology in general, if you have an app or resource that multiple people can be engaging with at the same time, that can be really valuable to help with that social engagement overall. And then another thing that you can do is specifically like with Chrome Music Lab and with some other things, you can modify it or develop it into something else. So if we were to use that as a songwriting experience with items in the room to increase that familiarity, we might then go into adding lyrics to it, especially maybe talking about the environment or some feelings that we have around it. We could instead use Songmaker as just a way to improvise, and that could also be enjoyable for the client. And really quickly, I'll show you too on Chrome Music Lab, you can also there are a bunch of different things on here as well. So you have the Songmaker, which we explored. There's also a shared piano, so that could also be used for like improv and other things. Sound waves, which kind of creates these almost like ethereal sounding sound waves, but it gives you like a visual as well while you're playing the piano. And lots of different things. There's a rhythm one. There's a lot you can explore in here, and all of it is very like simple looking, but yet very fun, especially for kids. So jumping back here, we can also, like I said, doing some looping. If we have, whatever we want in our Songmaker, that will just keep playing over and over if we don't press the stop button again. So if that's just continuing on, we could do that, and we could play instruments along with it. We could then add lyrics, do some vocal improv, lots of things we could do there. And you could also take whatever you've created in Chrome Music Lab Songmaker and turn that into a track that you might use in a DAW to use as part of a larger song or larger work. So some ethical and legal considerations, which sort of touched on a little bit in this presentation, and also Gray touched on as well, would be that depending on the setting or the policies of your setting, certain things, might not be allowed, like certain sharing files or using certain platforms, especially when you're working with kids. I think being mindful of things like screen time guidelines, especially given age, can be helpful. And like I mentioned before, also understanding the cultural context of different electronic instruments, apps, and even how music technology might be used in one culture versus another culture, and just views around that as well. And then as always, considering inequalities, kind of like Grant talked about in his presentation, which I think also applies to music technology, and considering power dynamics as well, in how you're utilizing these resources and how you're implementing them with clients. So for Crow Music Lab in particular, I know that some hospitals aren't technically allowed to use Google due to some privacy issues. So that would be something that you'd have to consider and ask if that's appropriate or not. And if so, you'd have to probably use a different app or website. But of course, always being mindful of privacy and safety practices while sharing. And ultimately, it comes down to doing whatever's most appropriate for your setting while also matching where the client is. So some takeaways. So 3 T's as takeaways of music technology. Music technology can be daunting, as we talked about a little bit in the chat, and it can be expensive. So I think it's important to take all those things into consideration, but then also don't be afraid to ask for help. And don't be afraid to take a collaborative approach to it. It's okay to ask around. It's okay to ask other music therapists, music therapy students, other people who are working in the particular field or setting that you're looking to work in. And it's okay to share ideas with others. And sometimes when we do that, then we come up with ideas or new ways that we can even use the technology. Treat technology like it's an instrument. We all know as musicians that working on an instrument takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. So using technology can be simple, like Crow Music Lab is a little bit simpler than some, but some technology can also be very daunting and scary. So giving yourself grace and giving yourself the time you need to get comfortable with that technology before implementing it in sessions, I think is really important, because you need to be comfortable with it in order to help your client also find that comfort with it as you go along. But I think taking it a curious approach and just approaching each bit of technology with curiosity and not being afraid to make mistakes, but knowing that that's part of the learning process can be really valuable. And then the last one is try to stay current. So as we all know, technology changes like crazy. It goes so quickly between different things, and everything is always changing and always, updating and all these different things. So just being mindful of when certain aspects of technology are changing and how to adapt to that. And I think along with that, because technology always changes and there are always new things and new apps and new resources, just keep exploring. Like, yes, it does take time, but I think the more that we can explore some of these things, it gives us more options and things to pull from, whether we're in practicum, internship, or working as a professional board certified music therapist. So the more that we can get comfortable with these things now does really open up the door for so many more things that we could do with clients. But again, I want to leave you with the thought of just meet the client wherever they are and make sure that if you do choose to use technology, that it does best help them with wherever they're trying to go and that they feel comfortable with it as well. All right. Well, we have a little time for questions if anyone has any. And these are my references. Do we have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. And if not, that's okay too. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, and we will take a 6-minute break and be back at 2 o'clock for our next student presentation from Claire Cunningham. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking through with us while we went on our journey today. We have one more student presentation from Claire. Claire, if you want to introduce yourself and then get going, you are good to go.
Well,
Okay. Hi, my name is Claire. Can everybody hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. I am a CSU student. I've completed my coursework in December of 2023, and I have been an intern for the last 5 months. I know that today we've had kind of a lot of intern presentations, so I will do my best here. I kind of reworked my presentation to be relevant to students at any stage, so I hope you are able to gather a lot from my presentation. All right. Can everyone see my first slide? And could someone possibly tell me with their words, since I can't see your faces while I talk?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Okay. All right. So today we'll be talking about the use of clinical improvisation to support growth in the social domain across all stages of a child's development. So for your information, I am at a pediatric outpatient therapy clinic, which means I see clients from ages 2 to about 15. And they receive mostly one-on-one therapy for a myriad of reasons. Today I'll be talking about why I chose to address social skills. I'll be talking about some really basic techniques in clinical improvisation, and then I'll be kind of putting those together using some clinical vignettes to describe how I have used improvisation to address social goals with clients. So I really wanted to speak on the fact that I will be presenting about the pediatric population in general. However, the majority of my research is geared toward the autistic community. So I did want to provide information off the bat that the autistic community has long been considered to have social deficits as a result of their criteria in the DSM and like conceptions societally. And I do want to acknowledge that historically, treatment for autism has been geared toward the reduction of autistic traits, which include these social deficits and repetitive and restrictive behaviors. And so I want to address off the top that I have considered autistic self-advocate perspectives in my research. And I am very intentional about why I chose to address social skills. Not from a point of view of conformity, normalization, or the reduction of autistic traits, but because I think that ultimately everyone, but especially children who are receiving therapy for any reason, ultimately needs community. So social skills can lead to feelings of self-confidence, feelings of self-advocacy, self-expression. We need sort of a background in social skills in order to communicate and express ourselves. I think also from a safety point of view, disabled children are taken advantage of. Unfortunately, the literature is out there at higher rates than neurotypical or non-disabled children. And so I think the ability to communicate and express oneself is very paramount with this population. So why do we use music to address social skills? So the first thing I'm going to touch on is dopamine. The presence of dopamine in the brain potentiates or mediates long-term potentiation, which means neuroplasticity is increased when dopamine is present. So we love music, we enjoy music, we find music motivating. And so that leads to the presence of dopamine and overall the long-term habituation of skills. So I think I want to highlight here that social skills are skills. They are challenging. People are in therapy to work through things that are hard. And for a lot of folks, practicing social skills is difficult. So the presence of enjoying and motivating factors such as music is so important in therapy. Finally, I think that music, we know this as music therapists, supports a really strong therapeutic relationship. So another sort of disclaimer I want to provide is that I'm focusing on the social domain, yes, but the more I did my research, the more I discovered that there is really no limit to the overlap between all of the domains, especially with emotional and cognitive. So in a moment, we're going to look at measures of social skills. And so I wanted to note that I didn't include very much information about communication and emotional identification in these social skills because I was really trying to focus on, I needed, like, for my own research sake to limit my project. But I really invite you, when we're going through the stages of social development, to be thinking what also might be going on in a child's life emotionally, communicationally, cognitively, and like also, you know, there's a lot to be said bringing it back to the fact that I'm focusing on autistic children, bringing it back to the sensory motor domain. When there are sensory processing difficulties, that makes communication difficult, and autistic self-advocates, as well as emerging neuroscience research, is pointing to the fact that there is not a lack of social motivation amongst autistic individuals, but that their sensory systems mediate their ability to socialize. So please, as I'm presenting, keep all of that in mind. All right, so if we're going to talk about improvisation for social skills, I think first we need to have kind of a framework for what is typical social development. I'm not claiming that what I'm presenting is typical social development. I had quite a long process for trying to come up with what I wanted to present as like options for what even are social skills. And so I looked at well over 100 measures of social skills in doing this research. And I attempted to approach this research from a multidisciplinary lens where I was pulling resources from SLPs and occupational therapists. I was also, you know, pulling the social responsiveness scale, for example. The first of the assessments that I looked at comes from ABA research, which does have a long and troubled history with reducing autistic traits. So I wanted to make sure that if I was including anything from a behavioral standpoint, that I also was including something from a developmental standpoint, which is where I looked at the functional emotional developmental capacities from DIR floor time, which is often considered like in contrast to the behavioral approach. And I looked at a number of musical assessments because hopefully, like as you will learn as I share, indicators in our music often indicate our psychological health. So what I mean by this is if a client presents as inflexible in the type of music that they listen to or create, often that may indicate that there is inflexibility in other areas of life. So I looked at a lot of musical assessments because that's what we do as music therapists, and we can gather so much information from music. So as I said, I looked at over 100 measures of social skills, and I'm still continuing this research. And I have sort of divided them into 5 categories for your ease of understanding. I want to make it so clear that this is not the way that these social skills should develop. They are presented, they are grouped together in an order that I hope you'll see makes sense. But again, it is not a linear presentation. So first, we need to talk about regulation. Clients may be able to demonstrate joint attention, for example, when they are regulated, but regulation is an ever-changing state of being. So I think it's really important that when we're working with clients, if we expect that they are capable of demonstrating a skill, in moments where they are exhausted or fatigued or dysregulated, we're not able to like practice skills. Especially, remember, therapy is hard, growing up is hard. So I think that's really something to keep in mind in pediatric music therapy, is that you never just acquire regulation and then you're good to go. That changes every single moment of every single session, every single day for the rest of all of our lives. So that's why that's underlined. It is, I think, the most important thing when you are trying to address any goal is, are you regulated? I have seen arguments for joint attention being considered foundational to social skills. Like you need to be able to present focused and then joint attention in order to engage in more complex interactions. I actually argue that I think joint attention is a social skill. I think joint attention is a social interaction. So that's something to keep in mind if you've never thought about it like that before. And finally, I wanted to discuss that the way that we measure joint attention is by affectual and physical responses. So how can you tell if someone is paying attention? Yes, there are things like, okay, I'm making eye contact with you and I'm turning my body towards you, but that is not the only way to demonstrate attention. So any change of facial affect or change in tone, stationary movement would look like, hey, the music therapist is playing music. I'm gonna turn my head over to like gaze at the instrument. Or dynamic movement could look like, oh my gosh, the music therapist is playing the guitar so loud, I'm gonna walk away because it's too loud for me. So I think if you're maybe coming from a more behavioral approach, you might not consider those to be social interactions, but I do, and I wanted to share that that's my interpretation of my research, is that that is a moment of joint attention. We are both paying attention to the music and having a physical or affect response. Okay, I need to fly through these. The first category of social engagement or social interaction is pre-engagement and engagement skills. You can see them on the screen. Again, these are not linear. I just grouped them together for your ease of understanding. The next is social cognition. You might notice when you're reading these that turn taking seems like the one that doesn't fit with the others. So I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that in order to take turns, you need to be able to recognize mood indicators such as pausing. So in a social interaction, if you are pausing, that may indicate that it's the other person's turn. And so that's, I think, how those fit. And so simple rule following, and I'm talking very simple here. Remember that I work in pediatrics, so this could look like we're passing a ball back and forth. At face value, it might not look like that requires many social skills, but passing a ball back and forth does require joint attention and the ability to pick up on social cues for turn taking, that like when I'm finished with my movement, it's your turn. So this next category I'm calling conceptual integration. So this is where we are building emotional ideas. So understanding very simple cause and effect, like this could be like a child observes their dad stub his toe and then his affect changes. So kind of observing cause and effect. So you'll notice, going back to social cognition, if you can A, recognize mood indicators, and then B, associate some simple cause and effect with those mood indicators, next, you can begin to understand why someone feels the way they do. The sense of self one is kind of this more complex skill where someone can understand when I stub my toe, it makes my face do this. When somebody else stubs their toe, that might not happen. So yeah, sense of self and like difference between yourself and others. Okay, gonna take a breath. I have a lot of it. I'm like really passionate about this. So considering that this is the Midwestern region, my experience at CSU, we are not a Nordhoff-Robbins school. I only learned about improvisation in the context of adult mental health. So I think that was another reason for wanting to do this presentation in the context of not adult mental health. So this is sort of your crash course in clinical improvisation, but really I want to get to the practical examples. So as we know, or may not know, there are 4 methods of music therapy, and improvisation is a method. There are several models of improvisation. There's a great book all about it by Kenneth Bruscia, if you've heard of it, and there are tons of models of improvisation that pull from approaches. So under the Nordhoff-Robbins approach, there are models of improvisation, which is a method, and then beyond that, there are techniques. We'll talk in a second about that. Okay, I think this is one of my most important slides. Why do we even practice improvisation when there are other methods of music therapy that I think might also be more intuitive when you're thinking about pediatric music therapy? Like Recreative, we're going to sing a children's song that they know. I think it is important to practice improvisation because it is client-led. Almost no matter what, and especially if you are listening to the client's music first, the entire experience is client-led. And I firmly believe that therapy is the most impactful when it's client-led. If you saw my intern take over, I said that. Another reason to practice improvisation is we can establish rapport with the client. It's kind of this, I hear you, I see you, and I'm gonna respond to it. That like collaborative improvisation is a really powerful way to, without any words, communicate that you are seeing the client. And finally, therapy is about change. Therapy is about improvement. Therapy is about experimentation even. And so I think that improvisation lends itself beautifully to a really structured and supportive environment to experiment with things that children can bring into the rest of their life. Children live in a world of play. That is how they learn. So musical play, any sort of experimentation or flexibility within musical play is going to show up in other parts of their life. And of course, listen to the client's music first. We'll kind of come back to that in the examples. Okay, so here are some very basic improvisation techniques that, like I said, I was introduced to in sort of an adult mental health perspective. I'm just going to leave them on a screen for a little bit because I've been talking a lot. So read through them if you are not familiar with them, or refresh yourself if you are. And now we're going to begin talking about 2 vignettes. I think I will have time to get through both. So the first client that I will share about has a parallel play goal. So that's the social skill that we're working on in sessions. She presents as mostly non-speaking, and her joint attention demonstrations tend to be mediated by her regulation, as I stated before. So, can you see my check marks? There's supposed to be like check marks on the screen. I don't think it worked. So there's supposed to be a check for regulation, but no check for joint attention. So this was a scenario where it was a co-treat with an occupational therapist, and the occupational therapist had brought in a board game that had little bee characters that you could like pick up and move around. And the occupational therapist was attempting to engage her in this game for, you know, her goals in occupational therapy. And I noticed that she was not jointly attending to the experience. So If you can gather anything from my presentation, I think it's that always know what your therapeutic intention is for using improvisation in the first place. So to talk through my therapeutic intention, my intention for beginning an improvisation experience in that moment was just to see if we could be jointly attending. It wasn't my intervention, so I didn't really care if she played the board game, but I was hoping for a joint attention. So that was my therapeutic intention. And the improvisational techniques I used, this is not one on the slide. I decided that I would start with a referential improvisation. So a referential improvisation means I'm pulling from a mood or an emotion or a color, as our keynote speaker was saying. I'm pulling from something concrete. In this situation, I was pulling from something from the environment, the bee toys. I was like, okay, we've got bees and I've got a voice. So I begun like doing a little like vocal improvisation, holding a little bee in my hand. It was a very effective way to get some like joint attention between the two of us. So my therapeutic intention for beginning the improv was like, check. And then, so this is a situation where, no, I was not listening to the client's music to begin with, but we weren't really engaging in a music experience yet. So I think that's a scenario. This is one of the techniques recommended if there is no music yet, is to start with a referential improvisation. That progressed into imitation. She imitated me, I imitated her, and we improvised with like buzzing noises until I pulled out a kazoo, so that it became an instrumental improvisation, which eventually turned into a turn-taking dialoguing experience, which, if you remember, her goal was parallel play, which does not require any interaction. I think that could have just looked like us playing with our bees together, but we were taking turns. So my bee was making noises, and then her bee was making noises. So the social skills that were demonstrated at the end of the day were joint attention, initiating interactions with each other, parallel play, and turn taking. Okay, next client. Also presents as mostly non-speaking, but he will direct musical play. He's highly motivated by directing musical play verbally. Two of his more social goals that he's working on are to identify emotions and take turns. Like I said, he really is motivated by, oh, we have checks for regulation and joint attention, by the way. So that's just where he was at in this particular scenario. As I said, he really enjoys directing musical play, so telling me what to play and how to play it. And he will use a combination of speech and gestures and writing to communicate this. So my therapeutic intention in this improvisation experience was actually to address some of his communication goals via his directing musical play. So I was not intending to engage in a turn-taking intervention at this point. Turn-taking is very difficult, and I am always child-led. I wasn't going to put that intention on the experience. However, we were on the same instrument, so I began with grounding on either end of the xylophone while he was improvising in the middle. And then when motifs would show up in his playing, I began imitating. So that's grounding, then imitating. And then he noticed my imitations. So he said, like this, and he did it. And then I copied it, which led us to a turn-taking dialoguing and eventually a conversational dialoguing where there are fewer pauses. And it kind of looks like a conversation where maybe you're interrupting each other and going, yeah, I agree, but kind of with our music on the xylophone. So I wanted to bring in this demonstration or this vignette because I was intending to address a communication goal, but I think improvisation is so powerful and so motivating and can be so enjoyable for children that ultimately he was able to address one of his much more difficult goals through the enjoyment of music. So thank you so much for listening. I cannot believe I did that in 25 minutes. I am presenting this presentation. It needs to be about double as long for my final project and internship. So I would actually love your questions and particularly your feedback about like what worked, what didn't work, because I will be presenting this again and including a ton more information. So if there's anything you felt like was missing or things you didn't like about my slides or whatever, like I'm not just saying this because it's what people say at the end of presentations, I would actually love your feedback. So both of my emails are on the screen. Going back into the Zoom now. Okay, or into the meeting. I can see your faces. Any questions? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I want to thank everybody for, sorry, I've lost my mouse. Where is it? I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Before we leave, I want to first, let's do our door prize. Okay. Hold on one second. I have everyone who put their name in the attendance in this little spinner, and we are going to spin it and see who wins. Ethan Menard, you have won a free Maramtaz t-shirt. So you put your email in the attendance sheet, so our treasurer will be emailing you to get all of your information so that we can order it and get it sent to you. Yay! Okay, and then some final thoughts. Let me share my screen one more time. Okie dokie. So some upcoming events. Our t-shirt fundraiser starts today. If you can see this little logo right here, this is the logo that's going to be on our t-shirts. Graciously and wonderfully designed by our very own Megan. Yay, Megan. We will have t-shirts, bags, mugs, and hoodies. So those will be on our Campfire website, which is linked in our bio on Instagram and Facebook. So you'll be able to get on and order those. It will be open. Kelsey, remind us of the close date.
Sorry for all the noise. It will be closed on the 10th.
10th. Perfect. So it will be open for about 2 weeks, and then we'll close it, and then we will open it again during passages. So you have plenty of time to order a t-shirt if you'd like. Our songwriting contest will be on November 24th at 6 p.m. This is always a really fun fundraiser that we get to do. So we will start advertising it and start putting out the link for contestants that would like to participate in the songwriting contest. And then we will start selling tickets about 2 weeks before the contest to anyone who doesn't want to participate and they just want to view. And please, please, please invite anybody that you would like. It doesn't just have to be a student. Invite your parents, invite your friends, have them come watch you sing. And lastly, Passages is March 19th through March 23rd in Iowa City. So excited to have it in-person passages, and I'm so excited to see all your bright and beautiful faces in person. Does anyone have any questions before we head out? Okay, wonderful. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope that you got even a little bit of information out of anything that was shared today, and we hope you had a good day. Thank you all.